Yes, everyone, you know what time it is. It's your boy Jack here at the Irish Hotspur, and we're going to be taking a look through the full squad announcement. Finally, we've been given our full 25-man list of all the players that will be taking part in this season, or at least until the January transfer window. There are some players included in this list that maybe plenty of us Spurs fans probably expected at the beginning of the summer not to be included at all, yet here they are in the list, and we'll see what that impact, if any impact, that might have on Ange Postecoglou and to the rest of this season. If you can, everybody, please smash that like button for me. Please get your comments in down below what your thoughts are on this 25-man list, what your thoughts are ahead of this season, considering this list that we've now been given. And let's take a look at our under 21 list, our non-homegrown list, as well as our homegrown list, and see what sort of areas we can improve upon, whether we're happy with it, all that good sort of stuff, everybody. But let's get into that. Now, when you look at the under 21 list, there's really not a lot to complain about. So many talented players in this academy that we have to pick from. I'm really excited which ones we could see perhaps be given some chances this season, although there are not many opportunities to give them because of the lack of European football and the lack of fixture congestion. But still, so many to be excited about, so many to be thinking about for the future. So that's why some of the lists, some of the names at least I have highlighted here for you are just players I think you should be, just keeping in your mind, keeping in your head for a while, because they could be, big up and coming stars for Tottenham through this academy in the near future. You have Tyrell Ashcroft, who's a center back. Archie Chaplin is another center back as well, along Alfie Dorrington, is of course, one of the huge talented center backs in our academy. We have Luca Gunter, who's a very talented goalkeeper, who's I think featured for the England under 21s plenty of times. Iago Santiago is the big left winger that everybody's been talking about because he's really started off form really well for the under 21s, as has Jamie Donnelly, another very talented winger, creative midfielder, can play a variety of positions. He is very good. We also have Tyrese Hall, very talented midfielder, of course, who I really like in particular, especially in that cup final. I thought he had a terrific game. Josh Keeley, who we brought in from the League of Ireland, is a very talented goalkeeper out of there. We also have Oliver Iro, who can play on the wing, very good player. Rio Kiramontan, who scored that brace, I believe, in the cup final. We have Will Lancashire, who's been scoring goals recently as a striker, brought in, I believe, from a Sheffield United, if I'm not mistaken. Ashley Phillips, obviously, is able to be registered to that under 21 list, which is very convenient for us. Doesn't, force us to have to think too hard about, which players we put in the homegrown list versus which players, we leave out. And also, too, you look at the players like Jude Soonsup-Bell, who's a very talented striker who was brought in by Paratici. Charlie Sayers is somebody who has been mentioned as a talented defender in that academy. Pop Matasar, Destiny Udoji, Alejo Valise, Ashley Phillips, all being able to be registered to this under 21 list really is brilliant to see. It just sort of solves a few headaches for us as well. I think just sort of speaks to that talent identification that we've been having recently. I mean, the fact that these guys are all under 21 and are so talented and are probably going to have some first team minutes at some stage, maybe minus Alejo Valise, but in the near future, he definitely should be getting some first team minutes. And it's just brilliant to see, the fact that we can register. I believe that is 4 different, sort of close to, or at least, in and around first team players to that under 21 list. That is absolutely brilliant. And if you were to sort of summarize all the sort of talented players that we do have in and around that academy, I'm looking at 3 talented strikers you could see from that list. You have 3 talented wingers, 2 talented midfielders, and 5 defenders that look very talented in and around that academy. But let's go on to the homegrown list and see what we have to do there. Now, the homegrown list, I'm a little bit less satisfied. I feel like there are a lot of players in here that are just being named as homegrown that are either really not good enough or kind of just being in the team in the first place or in the squad in the first place just because they sort of make up the numbers as homegrown. I would put Brandon Austin in that category. I would put Alfie Whiteman in that category right now, and I do feel like those are 2 players that I'm a little surprised we haven't moved on one of them at some stage this summer, because we at this moment in time have around 5 goalkeepers in the squad, and we will get to Hugo Lloris later. But when you look at this homegrown list, you're looking at 3 goalkeepers taking up homegrown spots there. That just sort of shows that maybe Spurs were kind of struggling to really find any sort of, players to put in this homegrown list, which speaks to the lack of talent that we can, fill in that area right now. Of course, we just spoke about a very talented academy, but, this is sort of that transition that we're going to need to make, at least bravely at some stage, because a lot of these sort of homegrown players here, I actually think really aren't good enough, or kind of just in this list in general, just sort of to make up the numbers. Like I said, Austin, Whiteman, good examples. I do feel like Davies does need to go. I understand maybe why he's been kept around this season, but I don't really feel like he is good enough for this Ange Postecoglou system. I'm looking at Oliver Skip there as well. I do feel like he needs to step up this season because at least right now he feels like he's a major drop-off when we do throw him into that midfield. He doesn't really work very well with Højbjerg, doesn't seem to work as well with other midfielders. I've seen their games drop, but that's just my personal opinion, so maybe we could leave Skip out of it. But you look at a guy like Sessegnon, let's be honest, last season, really not a great one from him, always injury prone as well. We paid a lot of money for him too, so it really does feel like we probably do need to just give up on him at this stage and just find him a new club, and hopefully he can find his way again. But the two players that you would say that are maybe of any sort of value or of any sort of, real talent in that homegrown list that could crack in and around that first team are Brennan Johnson and James Maddison. And that does really speak to how, little depth or how little talent we do at least have in that homegrown list. So I would say maybe 4 out of 8 of them need to go or are not good enough. And that's not even including Oliver Skip, actually. That's me leaving Skip out of that sort of list. So 4 out of 8 of those names I do feel like need to go because they're just not good enough or just making up the numbers just as homegrown players. We have 2 defenders in there. We have 3 goalkeepers, 2 midfielders, and 1 attacker. I would say 1 midfielder and 1 attacker, absolutely satisfactory, absolutely great in the case of Maddison and Johnson, but a lot of the rest of those guys I do not think are really good enough. Let's go on to the non-homegrown list and see what sort of work maybe still needs to be done there and which places maybe we need to think about for the future. Now, for the non-homegrown list, you can only name 17 players. That is the maximum for the non-homegrown list, by the way, but we have 2 goalkeepers in here. We have 3 center backs, 2 right backs, no left backs, which is something we'll touch on a bit later, 4 central midfielders, and 6 attackers, all included in that non-homegrown list there. Now, when you do look at, the places that are being taken up unnecessarily, I would point to Dyer and Lloris, of course. In Lloris's case, I think it's slightly different to Dyer's. For some reason, he's just rejected a bunch of moves away when they have been granted to him, and he's just decided to stick around and take up, and I feel like an unnecessary non-homegrown spot. But in the case of Dyer, we really did need to bring in center backs this season, and we only ended up bringing in 2. And I feel like one of them is more for the future. That is going to maybe be more of a risk to actually challenge for the first team in case Romero does end up picking an injury. Doesn't even feel like we have actually any sort of real left-sided center back options right now other than a Ben Davies, but I'm not even all that confident in that, regard. So it felt like, moving on Eric Dyer would have been crucial for us in trying to bring in any other center back to just sort of have him amongst the ranks. But he, I guess, decided to stick around and not take the opportunities that were given to him to leave. And this is where we find ourselves, where we weren't ruthless enough about this. And now you look at it, we could have replaced him with pretty much anybody across Europe. I know we'd like to think of Eric Dyer as sort of a guy that might be part of that homegrown list, but in fact he's not. He's actually part of this non-homegrown list, which means you could have replaced him with an Edmund Tapsoba. You could replace him with the Tosinado Abayo from the UK. You could replace him with a homegrown player. You could replace him with a non-homegrown player. Pretty much anybody who can kick a ball across the world, you could have replaced this guy with, and he ended up staying. Somebody who I think really did contribute to what was one of our worst defensive seasons in history. And it just feels like this was a major mistake on our part when it came to those outgoings. And I just feel like, an unnecessary non-homegrown spot being taken up there in an area that we really needed a lot of work in. Both of our right backs, by the way, are non-homegrown in the case of Emerson Royale and Pedro Porro. I just feel like that's worth noting, whereas none of our left backs, in fact, are actually taking up any non-homegrown spots. Ben Davies is a homegrown player, as well as Sessegnon's a homegrown player, and then Destiny Udoji right now is taking up one of those under 21 spots. So you could think about actually some sort of movement and maybe in that left back area, perhaps, Sessegnon leaving or maybe a Davies leaving, and you could think about actually replacing one of them with either another homegrown player or potentially a non-homegrown spot. But at least when it comes to the right backs, definitely can't add in any more non-homegrown players, at least in my opinion. We have 4 central midfielders taking up non-homegrown spots. You could say Højbjerg and Lo Celso are probably more the sort of kind of fringe type players, maybe inside that sort of 4-man, sort of list that we have there. I feel like Basuma's here to stay, Bentancur's here to stay, and then 2, when you think about it, we also were able to register Papa Matasar to the under-21s. That was great for us because he technically would have taken up, I believe, one of the non-homegrown spots. So we have to think about maybe moving on a Lo Celso or a Højbjerg maybe in the future if we were to, look for some real quality in the midfield by going after a non-homegrown player of any kind. For example, if we did end up, going after a big talented defensive midfielder like what Romeo Lavia was last season, let's say a new guy like that were to prop up, we would need to then, sell, I believe, a Højbjerg or Lo Celso in order to kind of just be able to fit the quotas of these non-homegrown sort of spots. Let's look at the attackers. We have 6 attackers right now taking up non-homegrown spots. Not many homegrown players challenging in and around those areas. We do have Perisic potentially going in January. I do think there has been some sort of move lined up for him to go to Hajduk Split, so there is that to think about. Maybe Brian Hill could actually end up stepping in for Perisic's spot. That would be, leaving a non-homegrown spot vacant, but Brian Hill does need to perform soon, and he does need to try to sort of break into this team, or at least challenge maybe more than he has in the past. And let's hope that Ange Postecoglou gives him that look, because you could see his as one of his spots being kind of one of the fringe sort of non-homegrown spots that might not being used at least properly at the moment. Richarlison, of course, we're trying to back him, and at least I'm trying to give him a lot of faith. But if you were thinking about, bringing in a Gift Orban or bringing in a Dusan Vlahovic or whatever, right, you have to think about Richarlison is already taking up one of these non-homegrown spots, so maybe you do think about moving him on as well, because we already have so many talented homegrown players coming through the academy, which is a great problem to have. But you do have to consider that we would probably leave one of our homegrown spots to maybe a striker in the future that's from our academy, and then maybe only have around 1 or 2 spots for a striker in sort of the non-homegrown areas. I feel like this squad list announcement does sort of reflect the mixed bag of work that we did in the outgoings department. I feel like we didn't have excuse not to get rid of Dyer, not to get rid of Lloris. I don't know how we didn't get rid of a Whiteman or an Austin as well. Those are like 4 players that just don't make sense to me how we didn't get rid of. Also, I feel like there's very little talent in the homegrown areas in that sort of midfield and sort of that attack. Brendan Johnson and James Maddison, at least right now, I would say, are the only players that are really sort of capable of sort of, really, meeting the levels that we need. And so you have to think about, getting in some more homegrown talent around that midfield and around that attack. I must say, looking at that academy, though, it's absolutely beautiful. It's just gorgeous. Thank you to the Don Paratici for all of his work and bringing in very talented players like a June Sudsap-Bell, Will Lancashire, Josh Keeley, all these sort of guys into the team, as well as bringing in new contracts, to some of our already very talented guys in that academy. But the fact that we also have Papa Matasar, Destiny Udoji, Ashley Phillips, Alejo Veliz also in that under 21 list is really impressive to me. Those are just such talented players that we have, cracking in the first team. They're not even going to probably be playing much under 21 football this season, and they're actually in and around the first team, which is very impressive. Just good to see, and it's just a reflection of the Don's work. Well, everybody, that about wraps up this sort of squad list announcement here. This is the squad that Ange Postecoglou has to work with for the rest of the season. Definitely some areas he's a little light in. Definitely some areas that he probably needs some extra work done in terms of the outgoings. Maybe some more homegrown talent thrown in, as well in certain departments. But this is the squad that he has to work with, everybody. Let's see how he does with it. He's certainly light in areas, but I bet he'll try to make the best of it. Let's not try to put too much pressure on him, though, in case, maybe injuries do happen, because we are light in certain areas, at least in my opinion. Smash that like button, please, for me on the way out. Get your comments in down below if you feel like I was wrong, or any sort of opinions, or any sort of areas in the, sort of team that you feel like I could have maybe analyzed a bit differently, or sort of had a different take on. Feel free to let me know in those comments down below, and I will be seeing ya. Come on, you Spurs. In the big Ange I trust. We never stop. I'll be seeing ya.